Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Freed, and I'm a principal here at Bloomberg Associates. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's Bloomberg Federal Assistance E3-1 webinar on navigating federal grants, building community capacity. Today, we'll discuss internal grants management models and how they impact community capacity and discuss strategies for building community partnerships. Some quick housekeeping items before we begin. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat function, as many of you are, including the cities that you're from. We also ask that you keep your cameras on if possible, so we can make this a more interactive session. At the same time, though, please mute yourself unless you're speaking. And if you do have a question throughout the program, we will invite you to come off of mute and on camera if you're interested in asking that. And throughout the program, you can use the chat function to share your thoughts, ask questions of the panelists, talk about some of the best practices you may be doing in your city. We'll be collecting these for use throughout the Q&A portion of our panel. And as I said, during that time, we may ask you to unmute yourself to ask your question if it's posted in the chat. Finally, and this is probably our most popular question, all the resources that we share today, both on screen, in the discussion, or in the chat, will be sent to you after the session and posted online at our E3-1 website, which we'll post a link to that for the session as well. So everything will be delivered to you. Today's session is part of an ongoing partnership between Bloomberg Philanthropies and the U.S. Conference of Mayors to help cities navigate and retain COVID recovery and response funding and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I'd like to recognize and thank Laura Waxman, Dave Gatton, Dave Burns, and Tom Cochran from the conference for their ongoing partnership and support, as well as my colleague here at Bloomberg Associates, Megan Sheikey, who helped organize today's panel. Through our program, cities have been able to ask national experts questions about the federal funding sources available to respond to and recover from COVID-19, as well as new infrastructure funding. In the past 2 years, we've provided detailed answers to almost 400 questions from cities, all of which are posted on our website for all cities to access. We've hosted almost 24 content workshops, like the one we're hosting today, to address pressing issues related to federal funding, including grant writing and management, strategies to boost municipal workforce capacity, how to leverage federal funding for resilience projects, and how to work with non-governmental partners. All of these sessions and the materials can be found on the E3-1 website. All told, approximately 6,000 municipal staff from more than 1,300 cities have engaged with the program, which is part of the local infrastructure hub that we kicked off in July. All of the materials from the hub, including notices of upcoming events and funding opportunities, can be found on the website that is also being placed in the chat, and I encourage you to visit that if you haven't already. Today, though, we have a full roster of speakers with us from Hagerty Consulting and Witt O'Brien's, two of the expert partners who have been working with the E3-1 program since we began, as well as a deep dive case study from Nueces County, Texas, to talk about how the recommendations and the advice we're giving today are playing out on the ground. I'll now turn it over to John Hageman, who leads the Federal Funds Management practice at Hagerty, to kick off today's workshop. John?
Great, thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to introduce a few of the key goals that will really frame this presentation and our discussion to come. One, we're going to talk a bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but just enough to provide the context for this broader discussion around community engagement and building capacity in your community. We'll also review grants management models and follow up on the first webinar that we had in this series, where we took a deeper dive into internal capacity and what that looks like. We'll talk about this in the context of how your various models may impact community capacity and building capacity in the community. We'll then turn into the bulk of the presentation and our discussion here today and focus on building community capacity, strategies for community partnerships, understanding the barriers to building community capacity, and how folks can go about mitigating those. And then, as Adam said, we'll spend some time diving into a case study presented by our partners in Nueces County, Texas, to talk about what building community capacity looked like for them and how they were successful in a few of their programs. With that, we can turn to the next slide. As I mentioned, and really just to provide context for this presentation and this discussion here today, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act follows a trend of, as you all are aware at this point, really unprecedented amounts of federal dollars that have been made available and will be and will continue to be made available moving forward. And we've seen that trend even continue with the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. But the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, unlike the American Rescue Plan, which really had for you all the local fiscal recovery funds as its cornerstone, involves new programs, altered programs, reauthorized programs, and regulatory changes really designed to rebuild the nation's infrastructure. Funding is going to be made available starting now over the next 5 years. And unlike the fiscal recovery funds, which are managed by US Treasury, numerous bureaus across 17 federal agencies are going to be administering north of 200 programs that make up the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Many of that funding, as you all know, and we'll share a bit more about on the moving forward, is going to flow down to the state and the local level. And mechanisms will vary by program. There'll be formula-based allocations, block grants, and competitive grants, which I'm sure many of you are focused on now and over the next several months. The other key piece that's important to keep in mind is many of these programs are new, and federal rulemaking is at the early stages for several of these programs. So that means it'll be important as you all are thinking about what internal capacity do you need, but also what community capacity is necessary to really monitor and track rulemaking as it occurs in real time, so you all can be dynamic and responsive to the changing environment. Next slide. So diving a bit deeper here, I think this gives a good understanding of the scale and volume of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As you all can see, about $700 billion will be available for state governments and about $220 billion available to local governments. What that means for all of you is understanding your state counterparts and the touch points with those individuals within state agencies are going to be very important, because many of those programs will either, one, flow to you all in a competitive manner or in a formula-based manner, or the state may be supporting investments within your own communities. And that's even more important when we talk about community capacity, because some of those same partners may be called upon not just by you all, but by your state counterparts in these types of programs. The other piece that's really important here to recognize is the scale around the number of unique programs. As you can see, there's about 140 programs north of that available to all of you on the call here today. And of that, nearly half are brand new. And so, as I mentioned in the previous slide, regularly setting yourselves up to track and monitor changes as they happen in real time will be very important as you all are thinking strategically and comprehensively about the funding opportunities through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Next slide. I wanted to call attention to a few examples just to give a sense of what are included in some of these programs. And we've pulled out 4 rather timely programs that you all may be interested in. And I wanted to highlight the state and local cybersecurity grant program in particular, because I think it's representative of a lot of what we've talked about already and what we will be talking about throughout this presentation. This $1 billion program is a new program. The federal government just recently released rules and more information about the structure of this program and how it works. This is a great example because states are the primary recipient of this program, but there's requirements for them to distribute that funding to local units of government. In addition, the state has to develop a cybersecurity plan to access this funding, and a condition of that plan requires engagement at the local level and at the community level. And why this type of program I think is a really good example is because it hits on the reality that some of these funds are going to go to your state counterparts and then flow from there. but also there are requirements associated with engaging the community, both you all and your partners embedded in some of these programs. And so as you all are thinking about how do I go about building community capacity, having an understanding of which programs have that at its core and are actually requirements for accessing some of these dollars are really important, so you all don't miss any programs for eligibility or other reasons like that. Next slide. So before we shift into community capacity and what that looks like, I want to revisit some of the discussion that we had in the previous webinar. And for those who were unable to attend that webinar, you can find that on the E311 webpage. In the first webinar, we focused on internal capacity and what that looks like. We talked a bit about the various grants management models that many of you are operating against and the variations of those models and how those models impact your own internal capacity. On one end of the spectrum, some folks on the call may operate more centralized grants management models. You may have a grants management office or some other type of entity that's responsible for overseeing and managing grants citywide. On the other end of the spectrum, and likely for many folks on the call, you're going to fall in the decentralized or the hybrid model. Departments may have responsibility and accountability when it comes to grants management, or there may be some type of coordinating entity who's responsible for coordinating and collaborating among agencies, but not as far as a centralized model where a lot of that is centralized under one entity. Why we're revisiting this and what I think is really important in the context of building community capacity is having an understanding of how you all operate grants management directly impacts your community partners. For example, in my previous life, I was with the city of Detroit, and we have a centralized model. Under that model, there's a single point of entry through the chief development officer and that function for the community groups and philanthropic community. It may be easier for community partners to access the city through that type of model than a decentralized model. But for many folks on the call who do operate a decentralized model, you're going to want to be mindful of the various touch points departments have with community partners. For many community partners, they may be asked to do or administer multiple programs by multiple agencies. That may put burdens on them that one agency may not be mindful of. So it's important, as you all are thinking about, how do I go about building capacity within the community and putting together a citywide approach to understand what your counterparts in other departments and other agencies are asking of those same community partners. And because I know we have a lot of finance and budget folks on the call today, you all, I think, are well positioned to offer a point of view on that, since you all likely know through the budget process all of the various agencies and their touch points with community partners and community agencies working on services and programs citywide. So at this point, we'll shift into the larger conversation around building community capacity and what that looks like. And I'll turn it over to my counterparts at Wood O'Brien.
Thanks, John. I first want to make a note, to make sure cities don't have tunnel vision as it relates to IIJA. We were talking about these topics in the context of the infrastructure bill, but these principles and these ideas apply to the regular federal funding, state pass-through funding, and foundation funding as well. So please know that there's a wide variety of funding opportunities available to you right now, and not just the IIJA. Building community capacity is critical. related to these IIJ programs, but others. I had a conversation with a client this morning that said, well, is it worth my time to do the community engagement exercise if I eventually don't go after the BRIC funding? And you should not look at community engagement in the context of a single program, but in the larger concept of a funding strategy and how you'll maximize money coming from IIJ and all these other funding opportunities. But before you get started, next slide, you really need to do a regulatory review. When we stood up a centralized grants management office, the first thing we did was engage our legal folks. And they looked at all the applicable statutes, regulations, and laws to identify barriers of entry, things that individual agencies and departments couldn't do, certain types of community-based organizations that under the current circumstances, we would not be able to partner with or do joint applications with. Some common items are things like organizations that make political contributions. There might be firewalls established, gift clauses. There are state and local jurisdictions that have items called gift clauses, and oftentimes grants get thrown into that bucket. And there are organizations who believe they cannot participate in grants because of gift clauses. Those need to be addressed from a legal and regulatory perspective. Conflicts of interest. Oftentimes your key non-government partners also serve in official and unofficial capacities within your municipality. They chair boards and commissions and serve in other positions. And how might that influence or preclude their organization they're associated with from partnering with the city? And then things like insurance requirements. Oftentimes cities repurpose their procurement policies for their grant policies and have insurance requirements that many NGOs cannot meet. So it's really critical before you get started to do that regulatory review and see if there are any barriers in place that would prevent community engagement. Right now, under the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, we have some interesting tools that you should examine as opportunities to maybe partner with some organizations that historically you have not been able to partner with. Things like beneficiary designations. Historically, NGOs could only be either a vendor or a subrecipient. Beneficiary designations were saved for individuals or households. Under ARPA, you can extend beneficiary relationships to organizations and entities. And it might be a way to, build some partnerships with some folks that historically you couldn't. Also, under the revenue replacement provision of government services, there's some lesser uniform guidance requirements that also might allow you to partner with some NGOs that traditionally, either they can't comply with or you would not partner with because of certain compliance standards. When engaging with your legal folks, as well as your potential NGO partners, it's really important to provide, the complete funding opportunity so that they can see what the regulatory requirements are in the context of the funding opportunity. We have often found that you ask for a legal opinion about a particular topic, you get one answer, it's out of context of the program. So to the extent that you can share the NOFO, share the funding opportunities, and really partner with your legal folks from the very beginning, that'll help with removing any of these regulatory or statutory impediments. Going forward, really determine what flexibilities you have. In some instances, it might be an area where you have no flexibilities and it's just not an opportunity for partnership if there's a conflict of interest provision or something along those lines. But as you're having these discussions, building these community relationships, know what flexibilities you have, where you can take alternative paths, where you can engage people different. They're the fiscal agent, you, the city, are the fiscal agent. those designations matter, who performs what functions under certain grants, and just have a game plan going forward. With that, I will hand it over to my partner, Jason Misselbauer.
Hello, everybody. Jason Misselbauer with Witt O'Brien's. We're going to talk about forging strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the who and the how here. So again, this is not a full list, but just giving you some thoughts around thinking about strategic partnerships and who to engage. So first is looking at nonprofits, obviously, or coalitions and alliances. There's a link there for the National Council of Nonprofits. This link will provide you statewide associations. These statewide associations serve your nonprofits in your states. In the past, we've engaged here locally in the state of Arizona. I engaged the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits to assist with marketing, communicating our funding opportunities, so we could, not always work with the same entities with every funding opportunity, that we were reaching out to a wider, broader community, given that their listing has the complete for the state of nonprofits. Additionally, engaged the Alliance to help us find new partners, looking at different sectors in nonprofits for demographic reasons or service providers, a certain service that a nonprofit provides. So a great resource there. Additionally, much like that, the Council of Foundations, that's a link to finding foundations in your states. We utilize this to look at who they were funding. We engaged the Arizona Community Foundation to see if there were folks that they weren't funding for one reason or another, and if we could fund them. Also, we looked to sort of merge our initiatives and provide funding to ACF to make a wider impact, more funding available. So another great resource. Additionally, looking at your community colleges or IHEs, your universities in your area. Many of them have schools that are, or colleges within them that really want to take theory to practice, and Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and the ASU Lodestar Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Innovation are two great examples. They are great for research purposes, but also for engagement and putting that theory to practice, with funding or with projects. Another one is other municipalities, not just in your local vicinity, but also thinking wider. Treasury released all of the data from the state and local fiscal recovery fund reporting for the last two reporting dates, and going through that data to look for other folks in your area, state, maybe region, and seeing what they're doing with the funding and seeing if there is some commonalities or some relationships there to partner with on initiatives, but also future funding opportunities. Additionally, there on other municipalities, looking at your local leagues, leagues of cities and towns or county associations for services that they provide and opportunities there to connect. And then one other thing that I thought of just today is also with being stretched so thin and people wearing many hats, look internally too to your municipality. I know one of the things that, working at a state, at least, we normally, our departments and divisions didn't know what other departments and divisions were doing, both, within one department, but also across the entire municipality. And then finally, or additionally, looking at national and state associations, coalitions like NACO and the National League of Cities, but also maybe around a sector, energy, electric vehicles, to name a few. And then finally, for professional associations or development, NGMA, GPA. Also, I know we have a lot of finance folks, GFOA. You know, for many of these organizations aren't just around the area of like grant management, but are providing guidance, you know, partnerships around trainings and such for you or your stakeholders. So when should we start these strategic partnerships? Much like what John and Matt was saying, you know, forging them now for the future. You know, it's starting them now. There's a lot of funding coming down from IIJA, you know, in the next couple months that are competitive and that will have the requirements that John was mentioning around inclusion, community engagement, et cetera, that, you know, starting now is your best case scenario. And then last or additionally to win is, you know, in these partnerships, make it a win-win decision for each other, you know, collaborating, listening to them, you know, figuring out what the appropriate engagement determination is for those folks, along with, you know, is it a letter of support? Is it co-application? Is it a sub? You know, figuring all of that out and communicating with them. And then lastly is why do these strategic partnerships? So as John mentioned, a lot of these requirements are going to be embedded where, you know, be it required or part of your own DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, you know, to reach that broader audience. You know, we see it in ARPA, you know, about reaching disadvantaged, underserved communities. And then finally, casting a wider net. You know, in all of these strategic partnerships, you know, it's as a grantor, it's making a better or a bigger impact, a larger impact across all areas, not just the usual suspects. And then as a grantee, so applying application, you know, having a stronger application by having all of these, engaging all of these different entities and areas. And with that, I'll kick it back to Matt.
So how do you do this? You know, obviously we understand that, you know, you all have day jobs. This level of effort is not free. You do need resources. Just wanted to make you aware that there are many grant opportunities out there for building community capacity, whether that be planning grants or phase one of larger grants. Many federal agencies, in addition to grant offerings, have training and technical assistance opportunities where you can actually engage a professional to come in and help you do the community engagement. So please seek out these opportunities and these resources. The philanthropic community is huge in supporting these levels of effort. Obviously, you know, Bloomberg, but Kellogg and Kresge and others. I mean, we are all so fortunate to have these organizations in our community to help with this community engagement. Utilize e-grant systems to identify funding opportunities. You know, grants.gov is great for finding, you know, planning grants and other types of grants to do community capacity. But take it one step further, actually go to the agency websites and look up training and technical assistance resources, which might not be advertised through grants.gov. Most federal agencies have a TA clearinghouse where they'll list the opportunities that would be available to you and or your community partners. These e-grant systems like grants.gov also have embedded training. Grants.gov has a Grants 101 section, which not only is great for, you know, new staff with your organizations, but also to make available to your community partners. So you're not having to develop training materials to roll out to community folks. Subscribe to notices of funding availability, funding opportunities, and cast a wider net. So don't just look for, you know, water, sewer, infrastructure type projects. Also look for these, you know, planning opportunities, community development opportunities as well. You never know where you might find opportunities that will help you with your community engagement efforts. As you're working with potential partners, NGOs, really encourage them to start the e-grant registration process. You don't know where your relationship is going to end up. One of the best things they can start doing is registering for a unique entity identifier and register through sam.gov. We are hearing stories nationally of this, taking 2 to 3 months. And it would really be unfortunate that you develop this really wonderful community partnership with a nonprofit partner. You're going to do this amazing project. You have an application all developed, and they're still waiting for sam.gov registration and can't participate. So, take care of the housekeeping work, both at the city level, but also at the partner level. And then wonderful opportunity right now through the local infrastructure hub to find funding opportunities. So really take advantage of that search engine that's out in the public domain right now through the local infrastructure hub partnership. It's an incredible resource. And for those organizations that don't have other sort of grant research and pursuance tools, please take advantage of this resource that's available to you right now. Next slide. So I talked before about regulatory barriers. Many of us also have internal process barriers that limit participation by NGOs. Just to highlight a few things like risk assessment. When we screen applications, we look for things like automated accounting systems. We look for years of experience, 5 years of audit files, those sorts of things. For key community partners that are just starting out, they might not have these things, nor do they necessarily need these things at that point. Also, if it's an organization that historically has participated in foundation grants, they might not have some of the items that you typically see with federal grants. So don't hold that against the organization. Same thing goes with peer review criteria. We'll look for things like, experience managing federal grants or, key leadership changes and things that arbitrarily screen out some people who would otherwise be wonderful community partners. This is a somewhat controversial topic. Formalize your grant procurement. Many jurisdictions do not have a subaward subrecipient process. And the criticism is that they pick the same organizations again and again and again, to the point that many nonprofits just say, it's a waste of our time. We keep applying and they pick the same people over and over again. And that really limits, that net that you're casting. So to the extent that you can put some formalization, some true competitiveness to your grant process, like you have with your regular vendor procurement process, it really goes a long way in establishing credibility for you as a funder and as a partner. And then lastly, look at post-award barriers. Something like payment processing. Some of these organizations you might partner with are very small, operating on a shoestring budget. And if you're only going to fund them on a reimbursement basis, that would create a cash flow issue for them to the point where they can't participate. Look for ways to allow them to use indirect cost rate in the de minimis indirect to actually build their entity, build their organizational capacity. And a lot of smaller jurisdictions are really hesitant about participating in federal programs because of the single audit requirements. There's a lot you can do to, explain that process to them, demystify it. But even there's some workarounds by, always funding them so they remain underneath the $750,000 a year threshold. Or if it's ARPA funding, there's an alternative review process. But an audit should not be a reason why a non-government organization, a community partner, does not participate with you. And with that, I will hand it over to Ben with Hagerty.
And maybe right before we hand it to Ben, just one point to bolster what Matt was saying. We heard in one of our workshops about a program in Atlanta where they were actually doing like a Match.com to help provide technical assistance to smaller organizations and to small businesses. And so there are creative ways if you feel like you're not getting the organizations participating who are sort of like your community boots on the ground, trusted messengers. There are ways to approach that, and we can help share out some resources about what different cities are doing to lower those barriers.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue to what I want to talk about here too. Kind of building on what y'all are talking about in terms of the issues that some of those potential partners face. So we've talked about in previous workshops some of the things that cities can do really to improve their own grants management effectiveness. But I think it's important to remember that we can also use grant funds and the grant process itself to really increase the ability of our communities to help deliver those goals and outcomes that we're looking for. I think about this in terms of de-siloing our communities, just like we kind of try and focus on de-siloing our internal departments when we work at cities. I think this is another step in that work. So building a little bit on what Matt just talked about, what I want to talk about here is a few things. Number one, what do we mean when we talk about community capacity, and what are the kinds of partnerships that we can build? The stakes if we ignore those partnerships, common barriers that organizations face in the community, and then some strategies that we can employ to help mitigate those barriers. So really, it's pretty simple when I think about community capacity. Really, it's just our ability to identify shared priorities and deliver results on those priorities. Fairly simple concept, but very difficult to get to in reality. So when I think about a community that has capacity, I think about a community that's able to identify those goals that are stable, that last the test of time, that enable a community to secure competitive funding in an increasingly competitive funding environment, and then to deliver those services in compliance with very complex and stringent grant requirements. What you miss out on, what you lose if your community doesn't have that capacity, is you miss out on those funding opportunities. You as a municipality can carry elevated compliance risk as you're contracting with or subbing out work to organizations that may not have the ability to deliver those outcomes at all or in compliance with the grant requirements. And we all know the common issues that come with that compliance risk. I don't need to belabor that point. But in the broader sense, it really does contribute to your city's inability to compete with your peer communities. Every community is being asked to do a lot with not much, and the more that you can do to make yourself and your regions more competitive in that environment is a huge return on what can be really small investments. So on the next slide here, a lot of what I'll be talking about today is focused really in the nonprofit community. Those are the partners whose capacity or lack thereof can really move the needle on getting results or missing out on those results. So this is just kind of to give you a sense of some of the kinds of forms that those partnerships with nonprofits can take. You can bring them in to do that community-wide strategic planning that helps you build that consensus that's so important. They can serve as co-applicants in all kinds of grants that John talked about earlier. In grants that you're applying for just for yourself, more and more community support is a key component of your ability to secure that funding. And so if you've built those strong partnerships, your partners can provide evidence that helps you secure the funding. Another one is sharing funding opportunities. So nonprofits often come across funding opportunities that may not be a great fit for them, but if you've built a strong network and a strong foundation in your community, it's very easy for them to share those opportunities with someone else who might be better suited for that funding opportunity. And then it gives those nonprofits an opportunity to align their strategic priorities with what the rest of the community is doing. Don't love to use the word synergy, but this is really where that happens, is understanding where the community more broadly is going can really help your nonprofits chart a path to success and not go off on their own, without appreciating that context. And then really when the rubber meets the road, ultimately you are going to be relying on your nonprofit communities to be your service providers, whether that is as a simple contractor or a vendor to being a subrecipient. And particularly in the subrecipient environment, the more capacity that you can build in your partner organizations, the better shape you're going to be in terms of being able to manage those compliance risks on the back end. So moving on to the next slide, what kinds of barriers will you come across in your community? Well, lack of continuity. So like I talked about before, consensus is so important, particularly in a world where you tend to have political cycles. They reset priorities oftentimes, and that can restart the cycle of engagement. And if you don't have an ongoing entrenched cycle of engagement, that can be very disruptive to your community's ability to maintain priorities. It can be very frustrating for your constituencies and your partners' constituencies, and it can really undermine your ability to actually deliver results. Some concrete examples of this is just staff turnover. So, a nonprofit has a go-to person in an economic development office, for example. You do need to build some continuity in terms of, who people know to go to get questions answered or to access funding opportunities. And lack of investment in core organizational competencies. We all know it. Organizations are being asked to do more with less. They're under great pressure to do that, and it's very difficult to develop, to acquire, and to retain core competencies like financial or grants management. There are many organizations out there who don't have any finance staff, or the finance staff that they do have focus on just delivering payroll every 2 weeks, and so that can be a huge barrier to being able to apply for a grant, or certainly to deliver on that grant and manage all of the compliance risks associated with it. And then another very common thing that you'll find in nonprofit communities is chasing the funding. So because it is so difficult for a nonprofit to do fundraising for their ongoing staff costs, that sort of plays out. It's very easy for a funder to see a nonprofit proposing a particular initiative that aligns with a funder's goals, or a capital project that's very easy to sell. It's very difficult for nonprofits to fundraise for their ongoing staff costs. And because of that pressure, it's very easy for nonprofits to succumb to pressure and temptation and accept grants that really pull them away from what their core mission is. The incentive tends to be just to keep the lights on, when you're talking about small or mid-sized nonprofits, and it can be very difficult. And that unpredictability, year to year, can cause lots of disruptions as well. So, if an organization goes from, a budget of $1 million one year to $3 million the next year, and then back down to $1 million, it can be really hard to maintain that continuity. So what can we do to address those barriers? So on the next slide here, a few different things. Number one, you can be intentional as a city to build that continuity and to drive consensus. So identifying stable priorities requires continuous engagement. It should, at this point, I think it should be very clear to municipalities that engagement should be built into everything that you do, and it should be real, and it should be aimed at identifying priorities that do have that broad consensus. And there's funding for this. It can be built into a lot of the grant sources that we talked about earlier. But another place to really find this is in those foundational partners that we talked about earlier. Foundations have long recognized this as a need. And so there is funding out there to support that work. And there's expertise out there to help you do that engagement. The second thing that you can do here is to leverage your status as a funder. So you have a lot of power as you deploy your federal funds or your own local revenue funds. And so you should be very thoughtful about how you design your programs and how you deploy those funds. Don't do that in a vacuum. The best way to do this is to know who your potential fundees are. So know what they do best. Know what their limitations are, and really try and meet them where they are. You're gonna have better results. You're gonna have less conflict, and you're gonna have better return on your investments if you're aiming funding where it's already prepared to go. So another thing to be aware of is avoid building funding programs that are one-offs. Again, back to that point about organizations facing so much pressure, avoiding just funding something for 1 year. The more you can build programs that are sustainable over time, the better the more success your nonprofit partners are gonna be able to have. And then another common theme, Matt just talked about this, is be open to those partners that may not be able to demonstrate support or capacity to deliver right now, because in a lot of cases, those partners have a lot of potential to do some of the really difficult service delivery that you need, or reach very difficult to reach communities that you want to reach. So as you're open to those partners, though, there are some things that you can do to make sure that they grow and build the capacity that you need on the back end as you're pushing out public taxpayer money. So what you can do is invest in core competencies. So again, these are things that are really hard for nonprofits to come by. Some of the targets that you might think about here are, in terms of designing programs that can do this, are nonprofits with budgets under $3 million a year or so. That tends to be the place where below that number, you have real pressures on competencies, and above it gets a little bit better. The other place is intermediary organizations who have experience partnering with those organizations. You're definitely not the only ones engaging with some of these nonprofits, and there's a lot of expertise out there in the foundation world or in those larger nonprofits that you may have regular contact with. So some of the investments that you can make are in human capital, so staff and volunteers, but also some pretty basic stuff. So administrative support, technology, system, software. And again, foundations are a perfect partner for this kind of work. They have a lot of experience focusing on community capacity building, and they have a lot of experience working with nonprofits. One really good example of this work that we were involved in Minneapolis. So in Minneapolis, the city currently partners with a local foundation to deploy a capacity building grant program. It's specifically designed to meet these kinds of needs. It's called the One Minneapolis Fund. It targets, just like I talked about earlier, those smaller and mid-sized nonprofits. And it delivers capacity grants. They're not very large amounts of money, and there's a huge return on investment for these things. So just some examples of what they fund. We funded $50,000 to the African Development Center. That supported them hiring a COO, CFO position. There was a grant for $30,000 to the Lao Assistance Center of Minnesota that just allowed them to purchase a CRM system that enabled them to do the data collection and reporting work that they needed to do to be in compliance with some of their other grants. And all of this was done with no public funding whatsoever. This was all just through a partnership with one of those foundations. So, and the result of that is now many of the organizations that have gone through that grant program are now able to deliver outcomes when the city contracts with them to deliver grant-funded services. So huge return on investment. So those are just a few of the things that cities can do. I think at this point, I will pass it over to Rachel, and she can kick off the case study. I know Nueces County has been doing a lot of excellent work along these lines. So over to you, Rachel.
Yes, they have, and thank you, Ben, and hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Knobloch. I'll introduce our case study today and the opportunity to see some of the concepts we've discussed so far in this workshop in action in Nueces County, Texas. Today, you'll hear from the Nueces County Judge, Barbara Canales. Before diving into the case study, I wanted to briefly provide some context here. Nueces County, Texas is located on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico with a population around 360,000 people. Within Nueces County, there are a ton of large rural communities, but they also surround large urban cities, including Corpus Christi, Texas. To serve such a large population with varying needs, the county received a state and local fiscal recovery fund allocation of $70.3 million and has to date allocated a little more than half of that award to projects designed to promote a strong, equitable recovery from the pandemic and address some really pressing community needs. We'll dive into this a bit more in a moment with the case study. But to set the stage for how the county leveraged this funding opportunity to build community capacity, it is important to describe the types of challenges they're facing, challenges your communities are also likely facing. Those challenges are related to mental health, to drainage and water infrastructure, to public safety and emergency response, COVID-19 response, supporting small businesses, supporting nonprofits and households, and allowing the county to have the resources they need to continue providing critical services. Moving to the next slide. And before introducing Judge Canales and allowing her to speak to her experiences and some of the community capacity building success stories in the county, I wanted to highlight some of the ways in which the county's goals to use state and local fiscal recovery funds in a transformative way motivated them through the leadership of Judge Canales to engage a diverse group of community partners and residents, including elected officials, nonprofits, small businesses, county leaders, government leaders, a whole spectrum of leaders to really explore unmet needs and identify shared goals and priorities, the very goals I introduced on the last slide. And then through those efforts, develop a joint planning process with partners that ultimately culminated in the development of a strategic fiscal recovery plan. This plan allowed the county to align their funding decisions with community needs and opportunity areas. Together, this plan helped not only maximize the impact and reach of state and local fiscal recovery funds by prioritizing the use of various funding streams, including ARPA, to address short and long-term community needs. It also allowed them to build local capacity to use this funding in a way that we'll discuss in a moment, awarding funds to nonprofits, including Agape Ranch as a case study, and then also to ultimately deliver on the overarching goals of the American Rescue Plan Act program, addressing critical gaps, meeting community needs, and identifying all of those needs and ways that you can address them with federal funds. With that, as we move on to the next slide, I am pleased to introduce Judge Canales. I've worked closely with Judge Canales over the past year. She has spearheaded much of the community capacity building efforts I introduced and inspired transformational projects that are really supporting the communities in Nueces County, Texas that are most impacted by the pandemic. Now we'll get to hear about how Nueces County is building community capacity and investing in transformational projects. And Judge, with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. And I know it says Maggie Turner on my screen. My chief of staff is helping me this afternoon to be able to visit with all of you, and how excited and delighted I am to be able to share our experience, because as Rachel says, it seems like when we said we were all in this together, we really should have just ID'd, the 10 most pressing issues for our community, and you could probably take them to most of our cities and counties across America. And one that we'd like to highlight is an incredible collaboration that yielded something that we thought not possible in years past. And that's the establishment for funding of a mental health restoration center with a component of funding for transitional housing. For years, we had seen our jails overflowing with mental health patients, but we couldn't do anything about it. We had a diversion program, but no diversion center. We seem to have all the will, but none of the brick and mortar. And so by really reaching out across the aisle and using the same techniques that we did when I called all our smaller communities and their mayors and leadership together to ask them what they needed during the pandemic, this time we called them and said, and how can we recover? And due to this type of community engagement, we were able to truly create a metric, a pie chart of the most pressing of needs. And the goal was, how can we deliver on what the community really is asking for? Will these funds serve an elected commissioner's court, or will it truly serve the people? By and large, mental health and drainage emerged as top priorities. But due to really the alarming rates of our opioid crisis in Texas and in South Texas, combined with chronic illness and tremendous just sadness because of both school shootings and COVID-19 having disproportionately affected South Texas and very much so our Hispanic population, we thought by focusing on mental health, we could really provide for not only community capacity with these funds, but healing. And as it turned out, we were able to award over $5 million in projects that both will address we will divert you if you meet that criteria of being a nonviolent offender, thereby having a direct impact on our emergency rooms, a direct impact on our jails. And here's a big one, on our law enforcement's time, on that human capital that's also so actually, it's in its own crisis, with vacancies, bordering 80 and 90 in our jail. And so this had a real impact to create transformational change in one movement. And I really say that because this whole thing is a symphony, right? ARPA is a symphony of dollars to do amazing things with. But whether or not you get good music is really about being very wise about how you're delivering on this promise of the dream of transformational change. And there's really just no better example, Rachel, than what we were doing. Now, I just want to highlight one more thing, and that is we've talked a lot about collaborations, using existing partnerships as highlighted in our bullet points. Let me suggest to you that this would not have been made possible if we did not have the judiciary, the law enforcement, the prosecutors, organizational components like NAMI and our mental health and intellectual disability, arms of the county's government, public health. These are hospital districts. These were the types of organizations, entities, and of course, awesome grassroots organizers that came together over a period of time to say, we hate what's going on, but we can't seem to get over the finish line. Now we've got it. And because of that strong existing collaborative partnership, it was easy to say to a national group like Centocor, and if we give you an additional $1 million, will you expand your housing so that when these folks come out of this diversion center, this restoration center, and the addiction is real, identified, then they're going to need a place to stay. And I think that is where our case study here in Nueces County is very special, because we targeted a known problem, one that we had a jump start because we had collaborated, but we were able to use funding to move us across that finish line. And then, of course, we fully executed by not saying, and then we won't just leave you there for 3 days. We'll tackle the holistic approach of outpatient services, and including the most important component is that transitional housing. So Rachel, I think that this is something that we're proud of here in Nueces. We thank you for your partnership. And of course, it goes without saying that we plan on messaging right back to the people that it's not us as electeds that made this great change. They were the conductors of this symphony, right? It was through the town halls and the online surveys, listening to them, meeting them where they were, that we understood that we couldn't just talk about mental health anymore in Texas. We had to do something about it. I can honestly say, I was just asked yesterday in an interview what my greatest accomplishment was professionally and personally. For most of us as electeds, we said the natural, our families, but that personal career accomplishment for me is this project, because I know long after me, this is a place where people can get healed. And we would have never had that opportunity before had it not been for this type of community capacity building.
Great, thank you, Judge Canales. And I also wanted to take a minute to introduce another project that really goes back to topics we've discussed so far in this workshop related to supporting local capacity at the grassroots level by investing in nonprofits. And beyond all of the fantastic outcomes that we'll see with this mental health investment, we also see a lot of benefits coming out of investing in nonprofits. And I'll briefly introduce some of the internal capacity building efforts that went into making this project happen. But I also wanted to give Judge Canales an opportunity to describe Agape Ranch, describe the community need here, and really introduce how this project came to be before I dive into the compliance considerations for this piece and ultimately summarize with some thoughts on community capacity building.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, let me set the stage for you. It's my understanding that on this great webinar here today, that there are many of you that are electeds, part of the United States Conference of Mayors, or perhaps you are county administrators, county judges like myself. And so I want to address something that I think is very important. And that is that as electeds, we have a front row seat to everything that is happening in our community. And it's sometimes through those front row seats where you do a classic ribbon cutting that if you'll just for a moment forget the fact that you're there ceremonially and really understand and ask yourself, how can I really make this project soar? What are the wings that we need to get this to fly? Because these ribbon cuttings so often are really an expression of we want to make an effort in our community to solve X problem. For Agape Ranch, I was invited to a classic ribbon cutting in an unincorporated area of my community, a place where acreage had been purchased and the dream had been built. In my community, close to the border, human trafficking is not something we just talk about as a national crisis. It's a real living, breathing issue here. And when you have a foster care system like Texas, what you have often is when the children term out, there is nowhere to go. And so what often happens is they do fall victims yet once again to the streets, to prostitution, and to potentially human trafficking. If they only had a place where they could continue to be nurtured, you don't stop becoming who you are most likely until you're well out of your teens. And so the idea of cutting the cord at 18 was unthinkable to so many in our community. So Agape Ranch, agape meaning love, came about for that reason, to provide a community neighborhood for these young adults who are still so vulnerable, who need to get their feet on the ground. So from a simple ribbon cutting, my mind started to think about what it would take to build more homes. And as that ribbon cutting came to an end, COVID hit. Coming out of COVID-19, they didn't have an opportunity to fundraise, to galvanize momentum. And yet the foster care system continued to explode, crises continued to, soar. And so I was able to make this a part of my own county judge's allocation, a decision made by the court that there was trust in our electeds to do good with some of the funds, not all of the funds, but I was given $4 million to do good with countywide. One of the projects I chose was Agape Ranch. I can honestly tell you that this home will be built and it will be a house that love built. It is a small amount of money with a major impact. I challenge all of my colleagues, mayors from across America, the next time you're at a ribbon cutting, ask yourself, am I here to cut this ribbon, or am I here to create and innovate along with this charitable organization? Find the wings for them to fly. Thank goodness the American Rescue Plan Act gave me all the tools I needed to get those wings on. Rachel, tell them how we made it eligible.
I would love to. So at this point and on the next slide, I can share a bit more about how we made this project happen, how we took the judge's idea to award funds to this nonprofit or to build these houses to boost their capacity and deliver on that goal, how we made that all come together. So we were able to, through collaboration with the county and this nonprofit, identify the need and establish a path toward addressing that need. We first met with the Agape Ranch leadership to learn more about the project, learn more about their organization, their goals, and then ultimately through that discussion, we learned about the scope of the impact on COVID-19, on their ability to provide those services, the impact it had in their ability to purchase land, the impact it had in their ability to access supplies to build the homes, and then ultimately the ability to fundraise and host galas to raise money for that purpose. And upon gathering that project information, our team was able to leverage the flexibility a speaker presented earlier related to making impacted nonprofits beneficiaries of funds rather than subrecipients. That discovery and approach allowed for simplified compliance under state and local fiscal recovery fund and uniform guidance requirements, and therefore ushered in a more efficient approach to awarding funds to Agape Ranch with the goal of getting funds out the door to the community as quickly as possible. We worked with county departments then to develop administrative tools designed to facilitate compliance with those regulations, including providing a comprehensive eligibility review and commentary on eligible program design, and then the final development of a beneficiary agreement that complies with all of the applicable regulations. And taken together, it's projects like this and all of the work that went into coordinating with potential partners and building priority project lists and attending those ribbon cutting ceremonies that really boosted the county's internal and external capacity to effect positive change in this community. And before moving into Q&A, I also want to note that although Nueces County forged these partnerships to inform their American Rescue Plan Act funding decisions, this collaborative effort and the process of identifying shared priorities will inform future grant pursuits as well, and is currently informing their ability to pursue Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. So this really speaks to the value of engaging with stakeholders and potential partners earlier rather than later, because building those relationships takes time, and understanding the full scope of community needs and the community's capacity to deliver on those needs certainly takes a ton of time too. And so with that, I'll pass it back over to Jamie for the Q&A section of our workshop.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you to all of our presenters, especially Judge Canales. It's inspiring to hear about that work and the effect that it's having on real people's lives. With that, I think our first question, and I'll ask Mayor Ziadeh to come off of mute to ask her question about your projects. To you, Mayor Canales.
Thank you, and I apologize for the poor lighting. This office is terrible.
You're in Florida and you're on, so that's a big deal.
Okay. How, we have, our city is a small city. The county isn't always as generous sharing their funds with small cities, and a small city, we don't normally get federal funds. So ARPA funds were a godsend to us, truly. But how were you able to substantiate to the residents this program as opposed to giving it directly back to them, because they're struggling? So they want assistance with their mortgages, with their rent, with redoing their house. As far as, we're in South Florida. Luckily, we were not hit by the hurricane. It went on the other side of Florida, but they wanted impact windows. They need their roofs done. So how were you able to substantiate not doing that versus what you actually did? I mean, I get 100%. I'm a guardian ad litem, so I agree 100% with this program that you did is amazing. And we do have some around the county, but specifically, it's that conversation, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
Yes. So first, let me just tell you that one of the things that we did do was set aside $1 million for 501c3s to apply. And we really have not been able to distribute those yet, but we are building capacity to say, hey, we're going to have a cap of, let's say, 25,000 or 35,000. And we're going to be looking for those 501c3s that really almost augment our own social service capacity. The second thing I'd say is that I was a real stickler about ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Programming. And I was so upset that the county didn't have enough funds. The city didn't have enough funds, the urban center, and the county had too much funds. It was lopsided. But we had the, strategic partnership of Hagerty to be able to develop they had proprietary software that really got rental assistance, which was in my neck of the woods sorely needed. So the county was able to lead in that rental assistance space. So while I'm trying to do good here, I couldn't abandon ship over here. And I really elevated the public messaging on tenants. If you need rental assistance, we're going to help you, but we're going to do it through this program. And then finally, I used the same, I'm an engineer, lawyer, but I always kind of fall back to what you know best. And in the engineering world, everything runs on a benefit cost analysis. And really what I decided was that at $83 a day is the amount of money that it costs if you are a mental health resident of the Nueces County Jail. That's what it costs the taxpayer. But if you're non-classified as mental health, you're probably running at the $20 mark. That inequity is hurting our property tax base. Our property owners here are carrying the shoulder of the burden for really an ailment that has never given its proper due. We just sorely underfund mental health in Texas, and we're paying the price. And so I was able to use an economic argument, and that economic argument was twofold. And then I'm going to get into the more of a personal or spiritual argument. My economic argument was, guys, this is so incredibly important for your pocketbook. If you care about true recovery for your own household, so you can have those extra dollars to make those investments that you feel are right for you and your family, you've got to realize that the burden you're carrying is your tax payment, because we don't have income tax in Texas. We do property taxes, is just outrageously high because of this mental health crisis. And so therefore, this economic benefit to you is a smart way of making a good investment. And then on the, I'm going to call it the emotional, spiritual side, what we have here is a classic, and this, might work for my neck of the woods, but in South Texas, just culturally and religiously, we had a very strong sense of, we want to make an impact. We really want to help people, but we don't know how. And this was a way to say, I'm going to help you find that key to that door that we've been saying for too long. And after being the #1 place in our community, I'm sorry, in the country, forget the community, we were there too, but in the country for COVID-19 positivity per capita, twice, July of 2020, when we first had COVID, and then again, unfortunately, during Delta. And we had disproportionate death for my Latina brothers and sisters and our Black brothers and sisters. And it was too much to bear, whole households being wiped out. And so when we said to them, we've all suffered and we want to get us healed, we've got the vaccine to get us over COVID, but what's really going to heal us from those addictions, from the drinking, from the drugs, from the depression, from the anxieties? Everybody turned their hearts to mental health. And that was a message I was able to bring home because it was right for my community. May not be right for everyone, but we had already endured Hurricane Harvey. So we had been already working on those federal CDBG, DR, and MIT programs. So I was blessed in a way that through tragedy, I had triumph, right? Through Harvey, I had money coming in for those homes. Through, ERAP, I was able to help with that rental assistance. And now through ARPA, I can tackle those things that are never going to be available to you unless I tax you. And I don't want to do that. And that economic benefit and that emotional, I call it the double E, that won the day here in Nueces County.
Thank you so much, Judge Canales. So it was really interesting to hear about how you were able to use, data and economics really to make that pitch, as well as, making the point about the social impact.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And while we are bringing up our next question, I'm also going to launch a poll, if you wouldn't mind completing that and just sharing with us, what we can be doing better. This is an iterative program. Feel free to also message me directly. We want to make sure that what we're presenting to you is valuable. We know that your time is a precious commodity. And so please share with us what you're learning and then what you'd like to see. And I will, while the poll is up, I will ask our next question, which was from Frank Zhu, who I think had to leave us a little early, but it was really about that sort of like, what are the core functions of a centralized grant management function? We had a whole session on that that I sent around in the chat, and I'll send it in the follow-up materials. But maybe Matt or John, if you could just, I think John addressed this one. If you could just speak a little bit about what you found in Detroit or the essential functions.
Sure, I can talk a bit about my experience in Detroit, and as Jamie said, we did a case study on just this at the last webinar. So I'd encourage folks to take a look at that. But the way we thought about it is, what is the full grants management life cycle? There's pre-award and post-award, and beyond the grants management cycle, how does that cycle interact with other government cycles that occur, whether it be budgeting, capital planning, procurement, hiring, and where are all of those touch points? And then we thought about, for the grants management office for Detroit, where should it live? Is it in a finance function? Is it in a chief executive function? Is it in an agency? We ultimately landed on the CFO's office for a variety of reasons, which I kind of got into on the last webinar. But I think it's really important. One, where does the office sit? At times they can sit with the chief executive. Sometimes that is a positive. Other times that creates the risk that those funds will be removed with the change of administration. So that's something to think about, where it lives. And then also, what are all of the functions that occur through the grants management lifecycle? And either are those going to be covered and performed by the centralized grants management office or another entity? And if another entity, what type of oversight or monitoring role does a grants management office have? So, I'll kind of stop there on Detroit. I know Matt probably has a thought on this given his time with Arkansas as well, but I would also encourage folks to take a look at the last webinar where we talked a bit more about Detroit as a case study.
Sure. So I'd just add some of the key functions of a centralized grants management office. It starts with grant research and pursuance. We, in the state of Arizona, we actually found we had multiple state employees whose full-time job was research and pursuance, and we were able to repurpose those individuals to huge cost savings. Shared services, whether that be managing a shared service type contract that agencies and departments can select off, or actually having those individuals. So things like grant writing, monitoring, single audit processing. One of the things you probably don't realize within your own city is you're funding the same organization from multiple departments, and they have a responsibility to send their single audit reports to each of those departments. And you have staff independently reviewing the same audit reports from the same organizations. Incredible amount of waste that we were able to centralize into a single audit clearinghouse within our centralized grants management. Certainly policy development, training, professional development, IT system hosting, if you're going to use a grants management solution. Again, in Arizona, we found we had 23 individual grants management solutions. We consolidated that into a single one, as you can imagine, the cost savings. But one of the interesting things I'd like to add is what a centralized grants management office can do is keep track of why you're not winning grants, why you're not being successful. Is it because you're not leveraging the right funds? You don't have the right partners? Your grant writing just isn't of a suitable capacity. So we were able to track not only why the grants we were winning, the amounts we were, but also track why we weren't winning and able to proactively address it. And that's something you can do with a centralized view of your grants management enterprise. So that's just a couple items I would highlight would be key functions of a centralized grants management office.
Thanks, Matt. That last point on why you're not winning grants is such an important point. I wonder if you have any advice for cities how to evaluate that, whether that's feedback they can get from the federal agencies they're applying to, or whether there are other processes you've seen that are particularly effective for that.
So some federal agencies and foundations are proactive. They will tell you your scores. They will tell you why you weren't successful. Unfortunately, that's not usually the case. You usually have to go seek it out, and it can involve a Freedom of Information Act request. Just like consulting firms will submit FOIA requests when they're not successful on requests for proposals put out by your cities, U.S. cities are able to put out Freedom of Information Act requests to federal funders to find out why you weren't funded. It takes a little bit of effort, but I will tell you the information you learn, the reconnaissance, is invaluable. And you might find out that it's had nothing to do with your project. It was geographic distribution or some other issue. When you start losing grants, you really start questioning your projects and your abilities. And oftentimes it's not that at all. So it's incredibly helpful to know why you're being successful or why you're not being successful.
Thank you. And as we're nearing at the bottom of the hour, one question that came through the chat, and Judge, you talked about the community engagement that you did that enabled you to have these programs to be so successful. And I know that both Matt and John, you've talked about community engagement being so central to the work you're doing. I wonder if anyone can speak to how you balance the need for that community engagement with the need to act fast, given the urgency of the need within the communities, as well as some of the federal deadlines that are around the funding opportunities. How do you balance that, and how do you know what the right amount is? And maybe Judge will give you the first opportunity to crack at that.
Sure. I will tell you that I thought it was incredibly important to make certain that we heard from everybody, and remember that we were still in a pandemic, so we had to do it both virtually. I had to gather in small groups, as well as, offer, big town halls when the time was right. But I do think that the, 6-7 months that we did this back to back to back was invaluable. But here's what you've got to remember. Once you gather the information, don't hoard it. Give it back to them. Teach them that you listened to them and that here's what they told you. Then you give them one more chance to go, oh my gosh, I had no idea. They may now agree with you in consensus, or they may say, oh, that's very disproportionate. As a mayor, you may not want to spend 25% on water, and so you may have to balance that out. But I would say that the community engagement is critical, but you've got to have champions. Not everybody's comfortable with going out there and, just putting yourself out there and allowing people to tell you everything under the sun, right? Everyone's got ideas and everybody, you've got to absorb that, but don't forget to give it back. So for me, the community engagement was well worth the time, but you've got to balance that, as you said, with action. So what we're doing just right now in Nueces is I am now marrying the decision-making process and I'm grading my paper. Did I get 15% as my community shared with me across the board, rural, urban, coastal, and industrial? Did I marry up with the allocations? And when I do, guess what I want to do again? Message back. Tell them that you're now appropriating it in this way. So yes, watch your clock. But I'll tell you what my favorite colonel from my Galveston District Corps of Engineers says, Barbara, sometimes you got to run with scissors. So all I got to tell you is that I know we tell everybody don't run with scissors, but every once in a while, it's all right. But have a plan, a strategy, and don't forget to message back and execute. Thank you.
That's
Matt,
great.
Matt or John, any final points to add to that?
I would just say, we made the points in the presentation that, the community engagement has to be an everyday activity. ARPA certainly forced us with some timelines, but this is something you should be doing early in advance of future funding opportunities that we haven't even learned of yet, to make sure you have those strong community relationships. One of the things Jason and I have done in Arizona with our grant research software is there were quite a few funding opportunities that we as the state were not eligible for. And we would routinely pass those funding opportunities on to county, city, and nonprofit organizations. And it was a very easy way to routinely be in discussion with those partners, provide them of something of value, and just have an ongoing dialogue with them. And then when we really needed, to gear up for a particular funding opportunity, it wasn't like we'd never talked to somebody or we hadn't talked to them in months, because we had that ongoing engagement. And that was that, sharing the wealth, sharing the funding opportunity, and just created a nice regular touch point. So something like that, whether your city has a community funding opportunity, that could be another opportunity, but create a situation where you are forced to have regular touch base with your community entities.
And I know that you're trying to close, but just one final thing that I think is important for mayors that are listening. We need to teach our community the difference between equality and equity. Equity is very important when given these federal funds. And so you may not look equal, but you can be very equitable inside your districts or precincts. And that equity has community capacity building. So I would just challenge everybody to understand, whether it's public health, understand the social determinants of health within your area, and that will help you understand equity. And when you do, then you're ready to go to bat with infrastructure bill, because that's all they care about is equity. And so practice what you preach with ARPA now, and you will be ready and poised for that equity conversation. Once you're prepped for infrastructure and of course, Inflation Reduction Act as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are all really great points. And as we've seen, the timing is really tight on these infrastructure programs, right? The NOFOs are coming out, and 2 months later, the applications due. So if you've waited until you know all of the guidance about the program to start your community engagement, it will likely be too late. And so, you know, now we already know what these programs basically are going to look like. So you want to be doing that community engagement now, even if the program's not coming down the pike for several months. I want to thank all of our panelists today. This was just incredible. I found it so educational, and I hope that it was valuable to other cities. I have put in the chat lots and lots of links to resources, including to our program website, where we post all the recordings and presentations, to the local infrastructure hub website, to the local infrastructure hub funding opportunity tool, where you can search for grants. If anyone has any questions about that, reach out to me. And then link to register for our next local infrastructure hub webinar. We'll also be sharing in our upcoming newsletter information about our next E311 webinar. We're planning activities on cybersecurity, for instance, and Matt touched upon the cyber program that is open right now. And so thank you all. I've also posted in the chat, if you would like to have a call with John or Matt or any of our E311 experts, just be in touch with us. And I've put how you can do that in the chat, because we can arrange a call if you're working through a sticky issue on how to do this community capacity building, or something else, whether it's an ARPA eligibility determination or an upcoming Treasury report. So thank you all. Our best wishes to everyone who is in Hurricane Ian's path. We're thinking about you. And with that, we are closed. Thank you.